To my guests now this morning, maybe a quick reintroduction. To my extreme left, James Mamboleo, who is an advocate. We have MP Kikuyu Kimani Ichung'wah and Patrick Gathara, who's a communications consultant in my immediate left. Gentlemen, let's begin with the crafting of that speech. I was watching it live, I'm sure you all were, and at the beginning, the first few minutes, it was 23 minutes long, he was bashing the conduct of the prosecutor. He was talking about Kenya's sovereignty, the AU resolution, and one imagined that he's not going. And then, you know, came around to saying, I will go. What did you think of the speech?
Extremely interesting. Of course, what happened was going to be expected. I have never doubted that the president knew he was going to the ICC, in spite of course, a lot of support for him not to go from a lot of his supporters. But of course, he kept everybody guessing. The very first moments in his speech seemed to suggest he was not going. But entirely, in the long run, he did the honorable thing, and he chose to uphold the sovereignty of the people of the Republic of Kenya, which is a function that has been, of course, squarely put in his office.
Yeah.
And he decided to go. I believe he knew from the very beginning that that was the right thing, and he did the right thing.
Okay, Kimani?
I think there isn't much to add. The president did a very wise thing yesterday. And I think what's most important is that he upheld that sovereignty of the Kenyan people. And I think those in the past, those of us who have told him not to appear before the ICC as head of state, I think we were vindicated yesterday because he chose not to appear as head of state and as president of the Republic of Kenya, but in his private capacity as Uhuru Kenyatta.
Okay, Patrick.
Well, I think it was a great piece of political theater.
Really?
Yes. I think all the talk of sovereignty and protecting our sovereignty kind of misses the point that the president was always going to go there in his personal capacity. You know, and he was charged not as president of Kenya. He wasn't going to appear in the court as president of Kenya. This has been decided by the ICC judges themselves, you know, but as Uhuru Kenyatta. And all of this hullabaloo that he creates around it, you know, I'm handing over to my deputy and everything, does not change that. You know, I think the greater issue behind here is what it was masking. You know, and in my view, the entire exercise that we saw yesterday was set up essentially to maintain the illusion that our president is immune from prosecution as president, which is actually not true.
Okay. What do you say to that, Kimani?
Let me say it's rather absurd for my colleague here to say that it was political theater. Because, as he says, it was clear from the beginning that the person who was charged was Uhuru Kenyatta even before he became president. But I think it is also clear that the AU resolution, I think sometime last year, was very clear that the AU resolved that no sitting head of state or head of government of an African state would ever appear before that court or any other court, international court, for crimes that he, as leader of that government or nation, had been charged over. And I think it's important to separate it the way the president did yesterday, to be clear that he is appearing before the ICC in his private capacity.
I'm sorry.
And I think what we wanted to uphold was a sovereign will of the Kenyan people, that they chose in March of 2013 to elect President Uhuru Kenyatta as an expression of their sovereignty. And it is that the president said he does not want to subject the sovereignty of 40 million Kenyans to trial as their head of state. And he would appear before the ICC in his private capacity.
So, Gathara, you don't buy that it was just to set the record straight in case anybody was missing the boat?
No. I mean, the president, let's start by agreeing is within his rights to
do what he did.
To give his powers to the deputy. He is allowed under Section 147 to go. But the idea, number one, that what the AU passes as a resolution can overrule what our Constitution says. It doesn't matter that the AU pass a resolution that presidents don't go. Our Constitution, Section 143, subsection 4 says that he can be prosecuted. It doesn't offer him any protection. So the idea that this was necessary, as Charles Nchai said yesterday, is hogwash, actually. This was just theater. That's all it was. Every time he leaves the country, the Constitution says under 147 that when the president is absent, the deputy acts. He doesn't need to sign any order.
But wasn't he, James, trying to balance that act out by doing this, giving this speech, especially in light of this AU resolution that had, made that, had put that position that no sitting head of state should be at the International Criminal Court? For you, was he able to balance that out well?
Yes, one point. The president must have put a very stark question to his legal team. I am faced with a situation in which I have to appear at the ICC. But at the same time, as Kenya, we went to the African Union and mobilized them to pass a resolution saying all sitting heads of state from Africa cannot attend sittings of the ICC while they are heads of state. And so how do we live with the fact that our African brothers and sisters are going to be watching us? We assisted them in reaching that resolution, and they're going to say Kenya is not serious. And so you ask them, how do we tackle this problem? And in my view, very brilliant constitutional engineering. They looked for an article within the Constitution that could help him achieve both of those two things. But of course, the point where I disagree with the Gathara is this: everything a president does, the presidency is an elective office. There has to be politics about it. He has to play the politics in such a way as to maintain the impression that he is in charge, and of course to make sure that everybody looking at him knows he's going to continue being in charge. There is no problem about that. The Constitution, the laws allow it. So the important thing for me is, did he go against the Constitution from a legal standpoint? Of course not. And I'm willing to give the president the benefit of the doubt, and I'm willing to admit that probably there is some semblance of him responding to the question, are you protecting the sovereignty of the Republic of Kenya? So long as there is no evidence to the contrary, we can give the president of the doubt. That is not to mean that he is not at fault for any other thing.
So, Kimani, this was, as some would argue, was it necessary for him to sign that executive order? Because when he has been absent from the country before, Ruto has acted before. It's not the first time he's acting. So why was it necessary to have that, as he calls it, theater performance going out of the country this time?
Let me say my colleague Gathara here, I think, is more informed by the coalition. I don't know, it's called coalition of what? This COD. Coalitions of distraction or something to do with that. They are thinking that the president did not need to do what he did yesterday. Yeah. But indeed, every other time he gets out of the country, the deputy president is left acting as president. I think it's important to realize that the Constitution is very silent on what ought to be done. And I think my advocate colleague here will vindicate me on that. That unless, if whatever William Ruto is to do as acting president, if it must have the force of law, there must be a legal notice vesting all the powers of the presidency in an acting capacity in him. Otherwise, whenever any other time that the president gets out of the country, without having to sign any legal notice, there are certain things definitely that William Ruto cannot do. Of course, Article 134 does restrict the things he can do, but 147 also tells the things that he can do. A simple example would be declaring war, asking Parliament to declare war on a country that is fighting this country. Deputy President William Ruto would not do that and sign that declaration of war. And for it to have the force of law, there must be something that is vesting the executive authority of president in him as acting president.
Before I come to Gathara, is that correct, that the difference here is that now there are perhaps more things he can do because there's an executive order in place than when he's acting, despite there not being an executive order in place?
No, not necessarily in my view. Ordinarily, the Constitution has vested the office of the deputy president with the function of deputizing the president. whether he is in the country or not. Now, what happens most of the time is that this is never brought to the public. And of course, a lot of people keep asking, so in the scheme of things, what is really Ruto deputizing the president on? Because they really never get to know what exactly the deputy president is doing. And of course, we are coming from a background where vice presidents had no portfolio. They just sang the song of the time, and they had nothing to do. Now, in my view, what the president has done is not unprecedented, probably in Kenya, but it has happened elsewhere. Nelson Mandela, when he was president, used to appoint the head of the opposition to act while he's away. Yeah. Of course, I don't expect in our situation Uhuru Kenyatta to appoint the leader of the opposition. But it is important. It is very important for the country to know that someone is in charge. But in my view, of course, without really going to the political undertones of what informed his decisions particularly, in my view, it is a good thing. It's something,
so
it's something that we should see more and more, right? Mm-hmm. So that even when the president is feeling a bit tired, a bit fatigued from, of course, the rigors of office, he should be able to tell us, hey, I'm going on holiday for 2 weeks. Can Ruto act? That shows a mature democracy. And this is something that should happen more and more. But lastly, the president, in my view, has shown a little bit of that maturity by saying, I can trust to leave someone in power while I'm away for 2 days, which is something we can encourage. We don't necessarily support everything the president does, but on that particular question, to the extent that it sets that kind of precedent, I think I support.
So, Gadara, for you, this was purely showmanship.
It is. I mean, one of the things my colleagues over here, I think, are ignoring is 147, subsection 3, essentially self-executing. It says if he is absent, the deputy acts. He doesn't need to sign anything to do that. That's why when he flies out, he doesn't need to sign anything. You know. Now, I have no problem with you saying, yeah, it's fine for the country to see him doing it, but that is just the political scheme of things. It is not a necessary thing for him to do.
But not wrong.
I didn't say it's wrong, and that's why I started from the beginning.
Yeah,
that the president is well within his rights to do it, but I'm saying it is a piece of theater. What I think we really should be asking is the other things that it is covering and what it is perpetuating. It's perpetuating the idea that the president himself, as president, is immune. That somehow, because the AU passed a resolution that throws out what our constitution is. And one final thing, Section 143, subsection 4, is an expression of the sovereign will of the Kenyan people. We passed that resolution, that constitution. And as an expression of our will, we say the guy who is president does not enjoy total immunity.
So are we sending the wrong message?
So there is nothing wrong if he didn't sign anything and he ended up at the Hague. You know, and don't forget, as Nyachai said yesterday, he is still president.
Yes, he is.
So there's this idea that somehow now he's gone, he's a private citizen, you know, is again hogwash.
So are we sending the wrong message with this AU resolution that African heads of state should not be prosecuted?
Sorry?
Are we sending the wrong message, as Gadara is saying, with this precedent that has been set?
I think President Uhuru Kenyatta was confronted with that question. Really, what do I do, as my colleague here said, with the resolution by the AU, which basically was lobbied for by this country, and I think the nation of Sudan. And I think confronted with that decision on what to do with that resolution, I think he had a choice to make. But the only thing I wanted to answer to was on the political message that was being sent by whatever was done yesterday. I think the only political message that Uhuru Kenyatta sent to everybody in this country, it was one simple message, that I do trust William Ruto as my able deputy, and I can hand over the reins of power to him to hold it when I'm away. The other thing that everybody in the CORD coalition, and probably their sympathizers like Gavara here, are not very comfortable with, is to see that one William Ruto now is acting as president. And you've just seen on the clips that you were airing a few minutes ago that President Uhuru Kenyatta is getting out of this country now as a private citizen. even William Ruto, the acting president of the Republic of Kenya, is not there to say him off, because we will not go and see off an ordinary citizen.
Well, that's just theater. No. That's all it is.
All right, we want to take a short break. When we return, you mentioned something that yesterday elicited a lot of reactions from Kenyans who are wondering, yes, now William Ruto is acting president. What if he refuses to give back the power? He'll help us clarify that. And also, what do you think he should do for the, 48 hours he's in power? And much more. Stay with us on Morning Express.